Bro, you're an adult. Why do you still watch anime? To anyone who knows anything about anything, this is one of the most annoying questions in existence. Anime is an extremely diverse movement with something to offer any mature cinema enjoyer. From bone-chilling horror to contemplative period dramas to existential comedy mysteries about taxi drivers who are walruses. The query, meant to interrogate the queryee's maturity so as to raise the querier's relative social standing in the petty work party banter hierarchy, or whatever scenario the question gets asked in, instead only serves to expose their own pathetic ignorance. Ha! You fool! The question you should have asked if you wanted to hurt my feelings is, you're an adult. Why are you still watching shonen anime? Ow. My feelings is what I'd say if I was weak. But I have killed the part that cringes, and thus can answer that question with confidence. Cause I wanna see a guy get punched so hard his head explodes, or tapped so precisely his head explodes, or punched all the way to the moon, and then 40 chapters later, the moon explodes due to completely unrelated circumstances. There are, of course, many other, deeper, more artistically satisfying things that make good shonen manga worth reading and anime worth watching, even for adults, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's just a lot of fun to see a protag be all OP and shit, and if you're not here for that, you're probably not here at all. Yet, curiously, when a beloved shonen series goes sour, or yet another new isekai sucks yet again, as the case may be, OP Protag-kun is often the first culprit viewers point to for the decline or dearth of that anime's quality. Like the legendarily dangerous Fugu Sashimi, good anime with OP heroes are a hotly sought after delicacy. Yet make even the slightest mistake in their preparation, and you risk irreparably tainting the whole dish. But then, how do you do it right exactly? Or at least avoid doing it that wrong? And why are heroes like this so prevalent in anime to begin with? Today, we're gonna find out. Normally, this is where I'd say, first though, a word from our sponsor, but for once I don't gotta get off topic because this video is sponsored by one of the most OP protagonists in anime history. The man with the power of an actual atom bomb, the Eminence in Shadow, 2nd season. Simulcasting now exclusively on High Dive. Well, His Eminence, Sid Kageno, probably wouldn't appreciate being called the protagonist. He sees himself more as an enigmatic anti-villain type, hiding his true identity as the OP leader of a secret society of sexy, slime suit-clad warrior women under the guise of the world's most pathetic and forgettable background character. Easier said than done when you got princesses and sorceresses throwing themselves at you left and right, and your extremely scary sister, who's pretty OP herself, keeps nagging you to, like, make something of your life or whatever. This season, to that end, Claire's dragged Sid out for a little adventure in the Lawless City, a sprawling fantasy slum ruled over by 3 magical crime families. However, their little family trip is interrupted when the Vampire Mafia unleashes an undead plague on the populace, forcing the separated siblings to team up with the other magic crime bosses and this badass vampire hunter lady. If you like your anime unapologetically over the top, then you owe it to yourself to sign up for a free High Dive trial at the link below and watch The Eminence in Shadow today. It's some of the most fun I've had with a fantasy anime in years. And it's not the only top-tier title High Dive has on offer. From modern masterworks like Girls' Last Tour and Akiba Maid War to all-timers like Legend of the Galactic Heroes and Patlabor, High Dive's curated collection of classics offers the best bang for your buck in anime streaming, especially for free at that link below. Speaking of classics though, the overpowered shonen hero is about as classic as concepts get. It's been an integral part of anime and manga since arguably their very inception with Tetsuan Atom, aka Astro Boy. He may not look all that intimidating, but within the small frame of the late Tobio Tenma beats a nuclear-fueled electro heart capable of outputting over 100,000 horsepower and detecting good and evil in the hearts of men just as a neat little bonus. Or whether they voted Democrat or Republican if you're watching the 2009 American version. I wish I was joking about that. Of course, overpowered is a relative term, and Astro takes on plenty of menacing mechanical foes nearly as mighty as himself over the course of his adventures. Though, of course, being the hero and all, he does always find a way to come out on top in the end, even when he's seemingly outgunned. Still, if he can seemingly be outgunned, can he truly be called overpowered? Can we say for sure that Astro Boy is the strongest robot in his entire world? Not without spoiling Pluto, we can't, and I really don't want to spoil Pluto, because everyone should go watch Pluto.
What am I looking at?
If I had to explain this in human terms, I'd call it death incarnate.
Luckily, there's an even more classic we can point to as the true source of this trope. And not just any classic, one of the 4 great classic novels of the Chinese literary canon, Saiyuki, Journey to the West. Arguably the single most popular story in the entire kanji reading world. And I'm sure some of that has to do with its rich Buddhist themes and pointed political satire of the Ming Dynasty, but I don't think anyone would argue that the real draw of the novel isn't its iconic hero, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, who is so iconic that many translations and adaptations of the story are simply called
Monkey!
Sun Wukong, or as he's known in Japan, Son Goku, is the OG OP Pro T, with unrivaled mastery of arts both mystic and martial, the strength and speed to outrun a meteor while carrying 2 mountains, and 72 distinct magic powers ranging from weather control to invisibility to self-cloning to pain transferal. His only real rival in battle is the almighty Buddha himself. A ton of the story's fun simply comes from seeing all the different ways Monkey uses all those different abilities to kick all the different asses of various gods and demons. And this is required reading in basically every primary school in East Asia. Imagine if, instead of bullshitting us with, if you squint and look at him sideways, Achilles and Hercules are basically Superman, your 3rd grade teacher just let you read Superman comics in class. Think of how much better that would make, our entire culture. It is almost impossible to overstate how much of an impact this story has had on anime and manga. The first anime Osamu Tezuka ever directed, even before Astro Boy, was a Saiyuki movie based on his manga Boku no Son Goku, or My Monkey King, which he started writing the year after Astro Boy. And despite being a robot, Astro himself is very much a hero in the Monkey King's tradition. Even manga heroes inspired by completely different mythological figures and creatures often carry elements of Journey to the West in their stories. Like Inuyasha, who's mostly based on Inugami dog spirits, has this mystic bead necklace thing that lets Kagome control his OP strength, the same way Monk Sanzong uses Goku's golden headband as a magic shock collar. But obviously none of those are the first anime that comes to mind when we're talking about iconic animated takes on Son Goku. Naturally, that would be Goku Midnight Eye, the story of this badass cyberpunk detective guy who uses his special eye that can control the entire internet to take on the forces of corporate oppression, including, but not limited to, this cyborg motorcycle stripper whose mouth is a laser cannon. Also, he has this, stick, but, high-tech. Then, of course, Dragon Ball comes a close second. Akira Toriyama's interpretation of Son Goku as alien invader turned unlikely guardian of Earth is the template that all modern shonen battle heroes are built from. It's not hard to see where all these copycats are coming from. Goku is still, almost 4 decades later, one of the best written OP heroes out there, at least in the original standard setting manga and anime, where he's actually not that OP for the most part, at least not relative to the threats he takes on in each saga. He can bench a whole car as early as episode 1, and he does win pretty much every fight in the first arc with ease, but after he starts training with Roshi and going to World's Martial Arts tournaments, he almost always has someone stronger around to aspire to beat one day, and that's vital since Goku's defining trait isn't really his overwhelming strength. It's the fact that he's never satisfied with being strong enough, that he constantly seeks out greater challenges to keep improving until he truly earns his OP overlord status. Outside of a few rare badass moments, like when he steamrolls the entire Red Ribbon Army single-handed, Goku generally trails behind his villains on the power curve up to their final fights. Typically, they'll rock his shit or his friend's shit at least once early in the arc, and even after heavy training, he only wins most big fights by the skin of his teeth, often improving beyond that training as his skills are reforged in the heat of battle. So while there's never any real doubt that Goku will save the day at the end of the day, it's just that kind of story, the series maintains a palpable tension in its minute-to-minute action, where it feels like any given fight could go either way, and just enough do to preserve that illusion and make each victory feel properly earned, even if it was obviously inevitable. This dynamic is something many of the best battle shonen strive to emulate. I'd argue One Piece has only been able to run as long as it has because Eiichiro Oda mastered it so early in his career. The back and forth tension of Arlong Park is basically perfect. The strong trio gets knocked down just enough times and stays down just long enough to A, make the villains feel credibly threatening, and B, give the weaker characters time to be credibly threatened by them, plus eventually beat some of their minor goons without undermining how strong the strong trio is. And from that point forward, basically every major villain spends half their arc dribbling Luffy's rubber ass up and down the battlefield until he eventually bounces back high enough to smack them in the face. Now, Chumbawamba has proven that people will happily hear about a guy getting knocked down, getting up again, and never being kept down on repeat for literally ever if it slaps hard enough, but Oda nonetheless strives to keep the formula fresh by varying up the rhythm of those bounces and spacing big fights out with fun side adventures like Little Garden, Drum Drum Kingdom, or Long Ring Longland, which also give the Straw Hats a chance to clown on some weaker baddies and remind the audience that they are, in fact, pretty OP themselves. A reminder we kinda need from time to time, since Oda's so good at this that the Straw Hats feel a little underpowered through a lot of their early adventures. But that's only because they are, actually, even as the most undisputed OP crew in East Blue. Overpowered is the Grand Line's minimum system spec. From the moment Mihawk rolls up and smokes Zoro, the audience is acutely aware that there are dudes out there who make Luffy, Arlong, and especially Buggy look like chumps. And further exposition dumps about the Four Emperors and the upper echelons of the Navy only make it clear that he's just the tip of an unfathomable iceberg. And if Mihawk was a huge fish crashing through the Straw Hat's small pond, then Aokiji is a goddamn whale.
Ice Age.
He's not just on a different level, he's playing a whole different game. And it takes almost 300 more chapters of adventures, plus a 2-year time skip training arc before the Straw Hats are ready to even begin playing what he's playing. That's really the earliest point that I think you can honestly call the Straw Hats OP by Grand Line standards. But even then, I don't think we in the audience really feel that from them until they've proven themselves in Dressrosa and Luffy's earned his own unofficial fleet. And it takes until the end of Wano, over 1,000 chapters in, for our hero to reach a level that's truly comparable to the legendary Super Saiyan. By my estimate, the end of the Piccolo Jr. saga, start at DBZ, is the place where Goku starts to be truly and undeniably OP. Even though he does kind of get his shit completely rocked and die fighting Raditz. But by that point, it's clear that the story can only keep escalating by literally going to space, and I think it's pretty telling that the scariest type of villain Toriyama could conceive at that moment was some Gokus, but evil. Eventually, he did hit on something scarier. A real estate speculator. But even with a job that monstrous, Frieza has to also be literally the strongest living being in the entire universe, according to God, to pose a credible threat by that point in the story, thanks to the instant, gradual win button that is the Genki Dama. And once he hits Super Saiyan, forget about it. Not even killer androids designed for the explicit purpose of beating a Goku can believably threaten to do that without also giving that Goku an unrelated heart condition that takes him out of commission for like half the saga, giving the other Z fighters time to catch up to his level, a la Jotaro in Stone Ocean. It's only when a different killer android from the future shows up that it really starts to seem plausible that technology might have reached a Goku beating point. And even then, if Goku and Vegeta hadn't both helped him, Cell never would have achieved that final form. Though, when he does, to his credit, he does actually beat a Goku for once in the last truly surprising moment of DBZ. But then, of course, that Goku gets better, and I won't repeat my thoughts from Let Goku Die, but I will add that one thing the Buu Saga is still really good at is finding new and meaningful ways to keep escalating the action. There aren't many things that top a psychic alien intergalactic emperor on the grand power scale, but ageless, eldritch, living bubblegum monstrosities are one of them, and as ways to raise the power level of a Goku go, duct taping two Gokus together is a pretty fun idea. But then, of course, the only place you can really go up from whooping an elder god is taking on a presently employed one, and past the fight with Beerus in the first new movie, which barely feels like a step up from Kid Buu, Dragon Ball's action kinda just plateaus. It can still be entertaining in occasional feature-length bursts of raw Sakuga spectacle, but as an ongoing story, it has no new narrative territory left to explore. At least, not when it comes to stories about Goku kicking increasingly menacing asses. And that, I think, is the biggest drawback of making your hero too OP. There are only so many things you can do with them. Almost any longtime D&D enjoyer will tell you they enjoy the game most between levels 5 and 15 or so. Before that, players spend most of their time using the same basic abilities on the same basic enemies over and over, because that's all the abilities they have, and rats and kobolds are the only foes they can realistically handle. The middle levels are where you start to really define and optimize your personal build. The abilities at play across your party become much more varied and interesting. Everyone has clear strengths and weaknesses, and thus the DM has a lot of design space to craft encounters that can uniquely challenge your whole squad. But then, when you get to those endgame levels, that space starts to narrow again until you're spending most of your time using the same OP abilities on the same OP enemies over and over, because nothing else is worth wasting an action on, and dragons and archfiends are the only enemies left that your party can't fold like a chair in a couple rounds. And don't get me wrong, those are a lot cooler than kobolds and rats, but the cool factor is a product of novelty. Anything can get boring with enough repetition, even beautiful muscle men suplexing demons and demigods. They call this stuff endgame content for a reason, Marvel. Most good action and adventure writers try to keep their stories in that mid-level range for as long as possible, and I think one of the reasons Overpowered Protagonists are as popular as they are is they let stories get to that place a lot faster. Like I said, Kid Goku and young Luffy aren't really that strong relative to the biggest players in their respective worlds. They're only overpowered relative to where we expect a hero to start their journey. Like the DM handed out level 5 pre-builts just to get things rolling. Instead of preparing them for tougher stuff later on, the early low-level encounters in their respective series mainly set a baseline for the level of badassery that the audience can expect from those heroes moving forward before the challenge ramps up to an appropriate level. Now, Mushoku Tensei obviously has a lot more going for it on a literary level than just delivering an A+ power fantasy. I mean, it takes a real special kind of writing to turn your hero almost jerking off in a library into a sincerely heartwarming emotional milestone. Proud of you, buddy. You've come a long way. But let's be real here. If it didn't do the power fantasy thing so darn well, Jobless Reincarnation wouldn't be one of the most successful and influential books ever written. It's tough to measure in exact D&D terms since the magic systems are fundamentally different, but Rudius starts out silent casting approximately 3rd level spells as an actual toddler, which would put him around level 5 right then. And while he is a little bit stronger by the time the adventure proper pops off with the mass teleportation incident, most of the quests and battles he and his party get embroiled in on their way back home sit comfortably in that mid-level range. And the story stays there well after they return through most of Rudy's battle with erectile dysfunction while he's moonlighting as a solo adventurer looking for his mom, until he fights that Demon King in the Magic School Quad, that is, and officially enters the late game halfway through Season 2. Which sounds pretty quick since we've been talking about long-running shonen this whole time, but by the standards of modern isekai, the genre Mushoku Tensei basically defined, it's slow as molasses. Nowadays, if your reincarnated hero hasn't beaten an archdemoness into submission and made her beg him to suck her titties within 30 minutes of being born, he's already fallen off the front page of the leaderboard. In much the same way that bad light novel writers see this story using taboo topics and weird sex stuff to explore Rudius's up character and say, wow, I bet I'd make like $1 million if I gave my audience insert a child slave, Mushoku Tensei's many copycats tend to covet the lucrative reader hype around big moments where Rudy blows big scary shit up with lots of big magic without really understanding how the story gets to that point or where any of that hype actually comes from. So they just use a cheat skill or a magic smartphone or whatever to bring their protag up to the level cap right out of the gate and then immediately get to glazing him up for the rest of his life as he trivializes every challenge they set before him.
かい剣と魔法だけじゃなくて体術もできるなんて疾風のごとき勢いで魔法を放ち剣技もかっこよかったですそうよカイン様に守っていただいてたのカイン様は最強なんだから
I don't even need a specific example of this. Just go to my anime list for the current season, doesn't matter when you're watching this video, sort by user score, scroll down to the 6 out of 10 range, and you'll find like 12 of the f***ing things. If not isekai, then some isekai adjacent premise like Demon Lord reincarnation or VR MMO shenanigans or quantum leaping back to your teenage body with all your cool powers from the darkest timeline or discovering that your magic skill that everyone thought was super lame is actually super OP and then using it to murder everyone who bullied you. I like to call that extremely specific subgenre, hey, don't come to the Adventurers Guild tomorrow. And I like to call this extremely specific sort of OP protag Kiritos on account of how they behave and almost all look like him. But that said, Sword Art Online actually handles this better than most of its copycats. Don't get me wrong, it still jumps straight to the endgame without really earning it, but Reki Kawahara did at least have the good sense to change the endgame being played at the end of each arc to keep things from getting too stale, even if they are still very predictable. It may be painfully obvious that Kirito's never gonna lose at anything, but hey, at least never losing at gunfights is moderately different from never losing at sword fights. The bar for this genre's in the Marianas Trench. But even so, even SAO does prove that you don't have to stay mired in that endless endgame. It is very possible to create compelling post-game stories around OP heroes. Frieren demonstrates that beautifully. The mighty elven mage's powers don't undermine the drama here because very little of that drama really hinges on whether or not she can win fights with demons and dragons. She can, of course. Boy, can she. But that's ultimately secondary in the narrative to her personal goal of understanding and connecting with people, which she's still very much a noob at. On the other hand, her younger, less experienced companions, Fern and Stark, are able to create that kind of life or death tension in the action because they're still only just a little OP. And Frieren can even drag them into situations above their level for some extra spice, since we know she'll be there to save their butts if needed, assuming there aren't any mimics around.
ミミックに食われかけた時は置いてこうかと思ったぞ。
散々の罠だって言ったのにマジかよ。
But again, the story's more about quiet conversations and the occasional loud argument than it is pitched battles, and the real purpose the younger adventurers serve is to help Frieren grow as a person while they grow in turn. In a weird way, it reminds me a lot of Mob Psycho 100, where on paper, Mob's psychic powers are completely unbeatable, and they certainly do animate real nice, but in practice, they only help him solve like maybe 20% of the problems the show throws his way. Because his story isn't really about fighting ghosts and evil espers, it's about learning to make friends and better himself. Kind of like how One Punch Man's not really about punching monsters so much as the struggle to keep going when your hobby becomes your job, and no matter how good you get at it, nothing really makes you feel anything anymore. Ow! No, false alarm. Despite the fact that his art, looks like this, one sensei was able to build two modest manga empires on the back of a single extremely potent observation about extra potent protagonists. Overpoweredness isn't just a relative metric, it's also contextual. You can be the most unbeatable martial artist or psychic or wizard or whatever on earth, but that ain't gonna do jack shit for you if you're facing Yukihira Soma in a cook-off. Despite his general inability to sneeze planets apart, Yugi Muto is undeniably, demonstrably, mathematically overpowered. Any game designer worth their salt who saw his win rate would instantly start trying to nerf his heart of the cards nonsense. Perhaps with some sort of card-ectomy? In both of these non-battle battle anime, the novelty of their mode of action, at least compared to your typical magic martial arts thing, lets them get away with far more formulaic and repetitive use of their OP heroes than most of us would tolerate from isekai or non-battle battles. But they also make it a lot more palatable that their heroes will predictably win basically every encounter by making all of the foes they encounter just super duper deserving.
You want a way out? We'll hand over all your star chips and crawl out like a scared little puppy dog. Bad doggy!
Well, what do you know? Check out what card I just drew. I think I'll go ahead and take it for a spin. Come on, punk. Fight me back. It's more fun when you struggle.
If you put on the They Live glasses and read literally any villain dialogue from Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Food Wars, all it says is, punch me in the face. Please, I want you to punch me in the face so f***ing bad. I need to be punched in the face right this second. If you don't punch my face, I will kick a puppy. This same principle also applies to Kakegurui villains, and Mashle villains, come to think of it. Oh, and of course, Misfit at Demon King Academy villains. If you can sufficiently convince your audience that a bad dude has something coming, they won't really care if they can see it coming a mile away. The added tension of waiting for that asshole's ass to finally deservedly get kicked effectively replaces the missing tension of uncertain victory. And if that asshole's ass then goes on to get kicked in a sufficiently impressive, creative, and most importantly, humiliating fashion, the raw schadenfreude will give you all the hype you need. It also helps quite a bit that a lot of these stories are comedies, or at least comedy adjacent. Overly OP protags are quite often unintentionally hilarious, after all, as anyone who's seen my roasts of Assassin's Pride or Record of Ragnarok or, like, any hottest trash video can attest, and that bug becomes a feature when your aim is to make your audience laugh. Of course, if a writer wants to go that route, they have to actually be, funny. You can't just claim parody to deflect criticism when you're unironically doing the same thing you're making fun of. There has to be an actual joke there on top of the self-indulgent power fantasy. For instance, in The Hero is Overpowered but Overly Cautious, the hero, despite being overpowered, is, get this, overly cautious, which is funny because Kiritos don't have to be cautious. That's the whole appeal of being a Kirito. If all your jokes are stuff like Protag-kun stops an attempted regicide by making both the princess and her would-be assassin get distracted fighting over his dick, I am gonna laugh, but not with you. Simply having the protagonist break the fourth wall all the time about how overpowered he is and how everything's just like one of his Japanese anime isn't really funny or interesting. Stories like Scream, Gwenpool, or Konosuba work because the meta-commentating characters are otherwise underpowered, incompetent, or both, and have to use their genre savviness to make up that difference. When you give it typical Kirito encyclopedic isekai knowledge, all that does is add one more bullet point to his phone book length list of unfair advantages. What makes The Eminence in Shadow so brilliant is how it turns this problem on its head. Sid Kageno's encyclopedic knowledge of anime tropes and general awareness of his own Shinubyo delusions ultimately, ironically, blinds him to the truth that Shadow Garden's secret war with the cult of Diablos is actually real. He's so genre savvy that he accidentally guesses all the deep lore of the setting with like 90% accuracy when he thinks he's just making up bullshit for fun. So the fact that he's the most overpowered guy in any given room is hilariously counterbalanced by the fact that he sincerely has no idea what's going on or why he's even here. It's also pretty hilarious seeing the lengths he'll go to hide that overpoweredness, like a Goku and Yamcha face.
I have to go poop. If I don't go right now, it's gonna trip down my leg while I'm running. Just leave me here. Go on without me. Please, I don't want anyone to see this.
We understand. We'll never tell anyone that you took a dump outside.
Go! Just go! Just go!
Subverting audience expectations about OP heroes can also have a powerful impact in more serious stories. Jujutsu Kaisen's Satoru Gojo is the embodiment of overpoweredness, a man whose mere existence throws off the balance of his entire world. And that was just when he was a kid. Since then, he's figured out how to survive getting stabbed in the neck and delete entire city blocks with the power of math, making him the unquestionably strongest guy ever. But the thing about Satoru Gojo is, for all the fights he doesn't lose, it's rare for him to actually get a win, because his power is so overwhelmingly obvious that no halfway competent opponent will ever try to take him head on. Any serious threat coming at Gojo or something or someone he cares about does so indirectly, distracting him from the people he's trying to protect, using every dirty trick in the book to get him to lower his guard before striking, and unleashing the Joestar secret technique the second things go south. I mean, Riko and Yuji both died on his watch, and despite fighting and defeating two great nature curses in season 1, he doesn't manage to kill either of them or get a single piece of usable intel that might have helped him in Shibuya. And speaking of Shibuya, I don't think I've ever seen an anime hero look cooler while taking an L that unfathomably massive. Of course, we shouldn't really be surprised that Gege Akutami's found such interesting things to say and do with these shonen tropes, considering his single biggest source of inspiration. Rarely, if ever, is it the strongest dude who wins the day in Hunter x Hunter. Rather, it's the ones who come best prepared who tend to leave on top. And because of this dynamic, I'd argue that very few characters in the series setting really count as OP. Not even guys as scary as Hisoka, because what's scary about Hisoka isn't the raw strength of his powers, it's the skill and cunning with which he uses them. And that's true true of most of the major players in the series, hero and villain alike. This relative balance is a big part of what makes Nen the best power system ever, but it actually gets better after that balance is thrown off. When the series does start rolling out villains who are just objectively stronger than everyone in the Chimera Ant arc, it changes everything. Like Gojo, the Ant King and his royal guards are so strong that their mere existence rewrites the rules of engagement for Nen battles. And because those rules are the foundation of the whole story, the audience ends up feeling this tangible shift in Hunter x Hunter's world that mirrors the political upheaval the ants are supposed to be causing. It's immensely clever writing, and it gets even cleverer when Netero, the closest thing this world has to a Goku, finally faces off with the king. Well, to be precise, Netero's always aspired to be a Goku and give his all to stop an existential threat to humanity in the greatest battle of his life, but he's never actually gotten to do that, and given his age, the appearance of the ants is probably his last chance to make that century-old dream come true. Which puts him in a rather awkward position when that ostensibly existential threat offers to sit down and talk things out like adults. I won't spoil how things get to that point or how they go down after. I really should just bite the bullet and make a dedicated Chimera Ant video already. But suffice to say, it's a moment that turns the whole idea of a Goku on its head. And it had me staring at the ceiling till the sun came up the first time I read it. I don't want to keep you watching this video that long though, even if it would be like crazy ad bucks for me. And besides, it's hard to really talk about these cleverer subversions of the trope without spoiling some of the best stories in anime and manga, so I'm just gonna put a pin in this discussion for now. But let me know in the comments below who your favorite Gokus and least favorite Kiritos are, and maybe we can talk about some of them some more in the future. I'm Geoff Thew, the Eminence in Basement, and we have precious little time, for the frenzy has begun. I must away!